To start with, you're going to want to gather your materials. You're going to need an embroidery hoop, some fabric, some scissors, some embroidery thread, a needle, an erasable pen, and your design. This erasable pen disappears when it's heated up, so you can either iron it or you can use a hairdryer to get rid of the ink. To begin with, I'm just going to draw a guide circle on my fabric so that when I'm picking my designs, I know they're all going to fit inside the hoop. Place your designs underneath and then line up your designs. I'm going to use the Christmas 2020 and I'm also going to put these fairy lights in above it. Trace with your pen. And I'm going to add letters to my stockings. One for me, one for my partner, and one for my cat. Now I need to put my fabric in my hoop. You're going to want to loosen the fastening on top of the hoop and slip the inner hoop out. The inner hoop then goes behind your fabric. Line it up so that the circle fits where the hoop is, and then slip your outer hoop back on top. Don't worry too much if it's not lining up perfectly at this point. We're going to recenter it again when everything's finished. Tighten the hoop if you can. And slide it all the way on. The fabric should be nice and tight. If you flick it, it should sound like a drum. I'm going to start with some black thread for the lettering. You're going to want to measure about an arm's length and then cut your thread. If you look closely, you can see that the thread is actually made up of 6 very small strands of thread. We're going to use 2 for this project, so separate just one strand. Hold the rest between your finger and your forefinger and your thumb, and then pull gently on the single thread. So you've got one, and then do the exact same thing again. Place the 2 ends together and pull it along. So you've got one piece of thread that's 2 strands thick. The needle in your kit has got a really big eye, so threading it shouldn't be too difficult. Simply slip through the eye, and then you're going to knot one end of your thread. Do one very simple knot, and then just do another in the exact same place. And again. And keep going until you've got a knot that you think is big enough to stop pulling all the way through your fabric. That'll do. Snip off the excess. Now, if you look carefully, you've got your needle and it's got the thread is making a U shape. One length of thread, the length with the knot on it, is going to be longer than the other. This piece of thread here is going to be what you're working with, what you're embroidering with. And as you go along, it's going to get shorter and shorter as it gets used up. All you're going to need to do is pull gently so that it gets longer and longer. And gradually you'll use the thread up until you're done. It will make more sense as you go along. We're going to use backstitch for the lettering. We're going to use backstitch for this whole design. Very simple. Simply come up from underneath and make your first stitch a few millimeters, maybe ½ centimetre away from where you came up. To make your second stitch, you're going to come up again a few millimeters away and go back in the same hole, going back, so that's your back stitch, and keep going. I'm going to continue to use the black thread for this wire here. I've only got a little bit left, so we'll just use up a little bit of it first before I swap onto a new piece of thread. I'm going to do back stitch for the wire itself, and then for these little the brackets on which we've got the fairy lights, I'm not sure what the technical term for those are, just 2 tiny little stitches. As you get to the end of your first piece of thread, rather than getting it all the way to the end so you're left with a tiny little bit, we're going to tie a knot now so it's easier. So find a stitch near to where you finished, slip your needle underneath, hold the needle with your thumb. Using this piece of thread, the working piece of thread, you're going to wrap it around your needle once, twice. Place your thumb over that little knot you've created and pull the needle all the way through. And then do exactly the same thing in exactly the same place. Just a double knot, double secure. And then snip off any excess. And then just get a new piece of thread, exactly the same as before. 2 strands, not the end. Thread it in through your needle. And then carry on. So now I'm done with the black, I'm just going to tie a knot in the same way that I did before to finish with the black thread. I'm not sure if you can tell and if the audio quality has changed, but I've had to switch to my headphones because my neighbours have started playing Elvis' Greatest Hits quite loudly. So apologies if the sound's changed, that's why. Next, I think I'm going to do my little stockings. I think I'm going to do red, green, red. So I've got red thread, again, 2 strands, knotted at the end, threaded through your needle. Again, back stitch all the way around your stocking. I think I'll do red stocking and then a little green letter, and then on the middle one I'll do green stocking, red letter. Can you notice getting a little bit puckered there? If you notice the fabric starts to pucker at all, just pull it tight. Go around and pull all the edges tight. And tighten your fastening if you can. Because I've got some red left, I'm going to use this to do some of my little fairy lights. I think I'm going to do alternate red and green because that's a good festive colour combination. Again, simple back stitch. Follow the shape of your little bulbs. So I'm just finishing up everything else in the green. 2 strands as always. And there you have it. We're going to finish up with a little knot. Same as before. 1, 2. 1, 2. As an optional bonus extra, you can use the silver thread to create a candy cane effect on your stockings. So I've done one so you can see how it turns out and decide if you want to do that or not. If you do, you simply knot your thread. 2 strands, same as all the other times we've started off. You're going to come up on the corner of your stocking, and we're going to use whipped back stitch. So we've already done our back stitch. We're now going to whip it. To whip a back stitch, you simply tuck your needle underneath your first stitch and pull all the way through. And then without going back through the fabric, you're going to do the same on the next stitch. And the same on the next stitch. And if you can see, the whip stitch sort of follows a nice little spiral through the stitches you've already done, and you end up with that candy cane effect. Keep going. Make sure that each time you go through a stitch, you're coming through the same side as the previous stitches. Keep going around the bottom of your toes. Careful not to get your needle stuck in any of these stitches, and also make sure that your needle isn't getting caught in this thread. Go all the way to the top corner. And then we're going to go back in this corner here. The reason is the whip won't really work on a bend, like a sharp bend. Work on this one, but not that sharp right angle. So instead we're going to come back up through this corner here and just whip these last few stitches at the top. And there you have it. Some candy cane stockings. I'm going to do the same on this final stocking. And there you have it. The final step, we're going to unhoop the fabric. Put that to one side for a second. We're just going to give it a quick iron. It's going to straighten out the fabric and also get rid of any of those erasable pen marks that are left. For the final hooping, I'm going to do the same as before. Just make sure you're really happy with where it is placed. Make sure it's nicely centralized in your hoop. Take your time, make sure you're happy with it. And make sure that the fabric is really tight and there's no puckering. You see I've got a tiny little pucker there. I'm just going to redo it. To make sure it's tight, give it a flick, tighten it if possible, and then the back. So there are lots of ways you can finish the back. Some people put a felt circle on the back, some people use a glue gun to fold down the edges, some people stitch a nice back on. I quite like leaving the back bare so that people can see all the work that's gone into it. So really simple solution is just to cut the fabric off as close as you can to the hoop. That way, when it's hanging on the wall, it'll lie flat. And there you go.